On my daughter's birthday, she looked at me over 32 flickering candles and said the best gift would be if I left her life. So I vanished. The buttercream roses on the Costco sheet cake glistened under the kitchen pendants, candle wax dripping like tears onto the Happy Birthday M icing. Red Solo cups paused midair, ice clinking against cheap punch, while her friends stared at their sneakers and my ex cleared his throat without meeting my eyes. Emily's jaw was set, her eyes cool and bright, as if she'd rehearsed this line in the mirror and decided it would land better with everyone watching. The helium balloons bumped the popcorn ceiling. The dog's nails clicked on the tile, and my own heart drummed so loud I thought it would blow the candles out for her. I didn't argue. I reached for my old leather purse, the strap soft from years of shouldering too much, and the house fell into a hush that made the AC hum sound like a freight train. My ring tapped the granite as I slid by, catching a whiff of vanilla, barbecue smoke from the backyard, and the sharp sting of candle smoke that followed me to the door. Outside, February air bit my cheeks, and salt crackled under my shoes as I crossed the driveway to my dented Camry. The windshield wore a skin of gray road dust, the passenger seat still littered with a Target receipt and a church bulletin. By midnight, I was in a motel off I-70, under a buzzing vacancy sign, the room reeking of citrus cleaner and old carpet. My phone face down while I listened to my breath try to find a rhythm that didn't hurt. You want to know why my own daughter asked me to disappear on her birthday? I'm Margaret, Maggie to everyone but her, and I'll tell you exactly how we got here. From the Little League sidelines to the hospital corridor where I made a promise I couldn't keep. I'll take you back to the casseroles I left on porches, the voicemails I didn't return, and the one truth I buried under, I was just trying to help. I'll show you the paper cuts of 1,000 small choices that bled into one big rupture. And I'll tell you the moment I realized love without boundaries can look a lot like harm, even when you swear it comes from the purest place. If you've ever believed that sometimes the bravest gift is stepping back, even when it breaks you, stay with me. If you know the weight of a choice you can't unsay, or the silence that follows a slammed door, this is your story too. Hit subscribe to walk with me through the mess and the mercy, and to hear how a mother and a daughter learn, the hard way, what goodbye really means. The motel's heater ticked like a patient old clock, wheezing out dry air that smelled vaguely of oranges and something you couldn't scrub out even if you tried. I lay there on top of the polyester bedspread, the vacancy sign throwing its red blink through the slats of the blinds, and I counted the seconds between those pulses because sleep wouldn't come. Somewhere down the hall, someone let a door slam, even though the night clerk had asked us all, please, to be mindful. I stared at the acoustic ceiling and followed the constellations of its pox. I've always been good at finding shapes and rumors and shadows and stains. Maybe that's why I get in trouble. By dawn, I'd folded my cardigan over my purse, slid into my sensible shoes, and headed for the kind of breakfast place that opens when the sky is still ashy. The Waffle House off the frontage road had a few truckers lined up at the counter and a pair of nurses from St. Luke's, their hair tucked into buns visible under knit caps. The door stuck a little like it always does, and it felt good to jolt it open. It felt like I still had shoulders broad enough to move something. The waitress called me Han and set down a mug of coffee without asking. I cradled it for a moment before drinking. That first sip made me think of church basement coffee in styrofoam cups, the kind we drank after funerals when your hands needed something to do. I unfolded the church bulletin that was still in my purse, even though it was Tuesday now. Good Shepherd's next potluck was penciled in. I'd signed up, out of habit, for green bean casserole. I stared at my own handwriting and imagined showing up with it, a pan warm in my hands, and someone taking it from me, not because they needed it, but because they needed to give me something to hold. My name's Margaret, I had said last Sunday to a young couple who were new, because I'm the kind of person who makes casseroles for strangers and leaves them on porches with a note that says, "Welcome, Margaret to the world. Maggie to everyone who loved me once. Everyone but my daughter." Emily's name settled into my chest like a book you set on a shelf and pretend you're not reading. She was 32 the night she looked at me over her candles and offered me the kind of gift you give when you've been keeping tally. 32 flickering points of light reflected in her eyes, cool and unwavering. And she said the best present would be if I left her life. She said it, and then took a breath, almost like she'd been underwater for a long time. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had chosen the path and was now walking it no matter who was crying by the side of the road. I wish I had that kind of spine. Mine is a different kind. More like willow branches that bend and bend until a storm snaps them without a sound. People made a space for me that night without moving their feet. Her friends looked down into their red cups as if the answers were there. My ex cleared his throat in that way that means he wants something fixed, but doesn't want to say it out loud. The dog skittered across the tile, nails tapping, as if his own paws were impatient with me. The balloons trembled against the popcorn ceiling, their strings tickling the lights. And still, I heard her words bobbing in the air, as impossible to grab as soap bubbles. I didn't argue because arguing would have made me look like what she already believed I was. I slipped the leather strap of my purse over my shoulder and felt how the spot it pressed had been worn soft from years. The ring I still wear out of habit tapped the granite, and I had a clear memory of the first time I picked out that granite in a showroom when Dan and I could still walk around dreaming together. We were going to cook meals, entertain, learn the names of wines. We were going to be the stage for a play called A Good Family. We did, for a while. We were. Those memories are the small mercies, and sometimes the small hooks that catch you when you think you're clear. I stepped into air that bit my cheeks and smelled like the river at Caw Point, cold and bracing. Salt crackled under my shoes from the driveway, a sound that reminded me of a school auditorium after a winter concert when you try not to drag your boots. I sat in my old Camry and put my hands on the wheel without turning the key. The windshield wore that veil of winter road film, and when I swiped it with a napkin, it just smeared the view, which felt about right. The passenger seat held a Target receipt and the Good Shepherd bulletin and a plastic fork from when I'd eaten a salad in the car while sitting in the Leawood Plaza parking lot, listening to a voicemail from Emily and promising myself I would wait to respond until I had better words. By midnight, I was in a motel that had probably been there since I-70 first carved its way across the country, when men thought roads could fix everything that was stuck. I lay on that bed and promised myself I would not call her. I would not text. I would not find out whether the Costco cake was finished or who cut the last piece. I would vanish the way she asked, and I would try to make that absence a shape she could recognize as love. Saying it is one thing. Doing it is another, especially when you have spent years doing the opposite of vanishing. Do you want to know what kind of mother has to leave out the back door of her own daughter's birthday? The kind who brings sliced oranges to a t-ball game and wipes sticky cheeks with damp paper towels and Ziplocs. The kind who paints a poster with glitter for a spelling bee and irons a uniform so crisp it looks like you could cut your finger on the crease. The kind who writes emails to teachers and coaches with the subject line, "Just checking," and means it literally, and also not at all. My whole life is Scotch tape and safety pins, extra napkins and emergency cash folded into a glove compartment with a post-it note that says, "Only if you really need it." I can see myself on the metal bleachers at the fields behind Crestview Elementary, a thermos of weak coffee under my seat, my old Chiefs hoodie zipped up to my chin while the wind made a sound between the aluminum slats that whistled like a warning. Emily was the kid who watched other kids and then did it better, once she decided. At 7, she brought her glove home and slept with it next to her face. She could get so serious. Her tongue would stick out a little when she concentrated, a habit she probably got from me. I was the mom who brought extra hair ties and had a Sharpie in my purse in case someone forgot their number. When the littlest boy on the team cried because his shoelaces wouldn't stay tied, I knelt on the chalk and showed him the bunny ears again. That's who I am. The person people look for when something is falling apart. The person who stands in a hospital corridor and says, "I've got it," before she even knows what it is. We were in a hospital corridor once, years later, when Emily was 25, and I made a promise I couldn't keep. The floors at St. Luke's always smell the same. Lemon cleaner and coffee and that sweet metallic hint of fear. We'd come in because Emily thought she couldn't breathe. It turned out to be something with a long name that basically meant a storm inside her chest. They gave her a paper bag and words for it and a number to call. A woman with a kind face, therapist, social worker, Someone with a notepad and a voice like the radio at midnight leaned both elbows on the counter and looked at me like she could see all the places my edges had been rubbed thin. "Sometimes," she said, "the most loving thing is to let the person find her own way. You can't do it for her." She didn't scold. She was gentle. When someone is that gentle, you want to hand them everything. I nodded. I said, "Of course, yes," because that is the correct answer when they say, "Are you willing to set boundaries?" I felt the shape of those words in my mouth like marbles I might choke on if I tried to swallow them. Emily sat on the plastic chair, her face puffy and her mouth chapped because she'd been breathing too fast. She wouldn't look at me. I wanted to cup the back of her head like I did when she was a toddler with a fever and a damp curl stuck to her neck. I wanted to be allowed to want. Instead, I reached into my purse and took out lip balm. "Please," I said, and she took it. So small a thing. So much rush in my chest at having done something useful. That night, in that corridor, I whispered in the direction of God, "Okay then, I will stop fixing." I meant it. I meant it as much as I've ever meant anything. Then a week later, when Emily hadn't gone to work because the air felt heavy, I called her supervisor and told a story about a stomach bug. I thought I was being a mother. A mother covers, smooths, fills the gaps. When Emily found out, she gave me a look so steady it felt like a mirror held up to my face. "You cannot run my life for me," she said. And then she turned and walked upstairs. She shut her bedroom door the quiet way, which always feels worse than a slam. When she got engaged at 29 to a man named Joshua, kind eyes, a little scattered, laughs too loud when he's nervous, I couldn't stop noticing things. The way he flaked on a brunch I'd planned without even texting, the stack of credit card applications he left on the counter like there was magic money in there. The fact that his mother called me to ask about my expectations for the wedding, but used a tone like she was making sure I understood my place. He was tender with Emily, and I tried to be good. I tried to hold all my words like hot stones and let them cool in my hands before I put them anywhere. I lasted 62 days. I did a thing that makes me wince even writing it in the air of my own mind. I wrote to his mother. I wrote a note, measured and polite, and just trying to help, where I explained how Emily was sensitive and sometimes overwhelmed, how she needed reliable support, and how I hoped Joshua would grow into that. I thought if I defined the problem for the other mother, we could both carry it. I thought I could build a bridge one polite sentence at a time. I mailed it, a physical letter in an envelope, because that seemed more intentional and less likely to be screenshot and shared. I was wrong in so many ways. Joshua found the letter. He brought it to Emily. He did not shout. He put it on the table like one sets down a knife carefully because it is sharp. Emily read it, and then she folded it and put it back in the envelope, and looked at me as if I had broken into her house and rearranged all the furniture so she would trip in the dark. "You went to his mother," she said. "You told his mother who I am." She didn't cry. I wish she had cried. I understand tears. She got very quiet in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The engagement ended 2 weeks later, for a dozen reasons, but the letter became the shorthand, the easy thing to point to when we needed something to carry the blame we didn't know where to put. The truth, that I wanted to save her from a man who might fail her the way mine did, hid under my words like a blade under a napkin. If you asked me to list the paper cuts of 1,000 small choices that bled into that night with the cake, I could do it while stirring chili. The time I logged into her college account to check her grades because she wouldn't tell me, and then sat in my car outside her apartment holding the phone, fingers numb, trying to decide whether to confront her or pretend I hadn't seen. The afternoon I knocked on her door with a bag of groceries, just because, when I had read in a text I wasn't supposed to see that she was stretched thin. The Sunday I introduced myself to her boss at the boutique in Prairie Village, and made a joke about how we moms are the original HR, and watched Emily's cheeks bloom pink as a peony, her smile tight as a zipper. The night I drove over to her place with Soup when she had the flu, and used the spare key I'd never returned even after the therapist with the kind eyes had said, "Ask her if she wants you to have a key." Emily came out of the bathroom, hair like damp seaweed, and found me in her kitchen ladling soup into her bowl. "No," she said, voice low. And I understood then that you can say no to soup, and it will still fill your house with smell. In my mind, I was always the good kind of mother, the one who stays. After Dan and I divorced, years of small meannesses, of him shrinking away from things that needed doing, of me taking up the slack and resenting it, and then apologizing for the resentment, I stayed. He was the sort of man everyone liked in conversation, and no one could count on at 3 a.m. He cleared his throat that way he did at the party when something hard needed to be done, and he wanted to be thanked for the idea, not for the doing. We raised a girl between us like a delicate plant passed back and forth when we should have been building a trellis for it to climb. I worked at Crestview as the school secretary for 22 years, the woman behind the desk who knew which locker stuck and which mother to call first. I kept Band-Aids in my drawer and mints in my purse, a sewing kit hidden under the attendance sheets. After the divorce, I took on cleaning offices on the plaza at night. It's funny, the things you learn about people when you empty their trash cans, the takeout containers with the same sauce smeared into the corners, the gum wrappers folded into precise squares like someone was keeping the world tidy from the inside out. I would come home just before midnight, my feet humming, and sleep in those intervals you get when your mattress is old and your mind is a dog that insists on being let out to check the yard at 2 a.m. I sold my original engagement ring when the crown fell out because I refused to glue a symbol back together. I used that money for Emily's braces and tried not to think of myself every time I looked at her smile. There's this photograph I keep in the pocket of the coat I wear to the plaza lights in December, a picture of Emily at 8 with a missing front tooth, grinning through the gap like the world was making room for something. We are on a blanket at Loose Park, and she is in my lap. My hair is pulled back in a practical ponytail, and I'm laughing at something I can't remember now. A woman with a stroller walked by and later sent us this picture. I never learned her name. I've pulled that photo out in doctors' waiting rooms and bank lines, and once in the DMV when the woman in front of me was crying quietly. It's a talisman and a warning. Love feels like that sometimes. A sunny day in a park, and then a winter night in a waiting room, and your own face in a reflection you don't recognize. If I want to explain the day of the birthday, I should tell you about the way disdain lives in the corners of a house. It isn't big. It isn't dramatic. It's that quick eye roll you pretend you didn't see. It's your name said in a voice that turns it into something else. Maggie, Emily would say sometimes, not Mom, when she called me out in front of other people, like a teacher asking a student to take her seat, or the time after church when I hugged her, and she kept her arms down and said, "We talked about this. We, the therapist and her. We. The new language that wants to tidy up all the messy words like need and guilt and gratitude and love." She used to call me Mommy when she had nightmares and crawled into my bed, knees sharp as a cat's back. "Mommy, I can't turn off my brain," she whispered once when she was 14, and something going on at school had turned her stomach inside out. I rubbed circles on her back. You can only rub so many circles with your hand before the skin on your own palm feels chafed. You can, however, keep rubbing long past that. I think of my palm sometimes, and I wish I had listened to the lesson in it. People need to learn to rub their own circles, or decide to keep theirs unsmoothed. After the party, after the motel breakfast, I drove around the city I've learned like a book, reading it out loud to myself. East on 70, exit for the Paseo, past clusters of warehouses and the sudden spire of a church that makes you want to look up. I bought gas at Quick Trip and thanked the boy who held the door with his hip because his hands were full of donuts. I drove down to the riverfront and sat watching a barge move slow like a thought you don't want to have. Kansas City shows you it's working hard if you go looking for it. Freight trains. Men in bright vests with coffee in one hand and a cigarette smoldering as if it didn't know it was too early in the day for that. I found a room on the Missouri side, a weekly rate, and paid in cash with bills I unfolded carefully like old letters. The woman at the desk wore blue nail polish and had a kind streak when she told me the rooms that didn't smell like smoke would cost $5 more. I asked for one of those. I wiped down the surfaces anyway. I lined up the things, toothbrush in the plastic cup, soap unwrapped and set on the tray, cardigan hung on the hook. I am my mother's daughter in that way. Ruth taught me to make a place out of anywhere. Military brat. she'd say, even though her father had only been in the army for 2 years in the kind of war that makes everyone in town think you did more than you did. Still, she could look at a room and see the places where a person could lay their head and not be afraid. I ate dinner alone, a box of leftover barbecue from a Sunday I had sliced and divided and stored, the last burnt ends I'd been saving like a treat. I squirted Gates sauce onto the meat and tasted smoke and pepper and a tang that will always mean home to me. I licked my fingers because I was alone, and sometimes that is a small grace. I washed my hands in the sink and dried them on the towel that leaves lint on your fingers, and felt, for an instant, the terror of the edge of the world. Then the heater ticked again, and somewhere in the hallway, a little girl laughed, high and liquid, and the sound walked itself into my room and sat down beside me. If you want the list of sacrifices, I can give it to you like a ledger, if that would make it easier to weigh. The way I put off the trip to Santa Fe with my friend Barbara, once, twice, then forever, because there was always a play at school or a stomach bug or a big test. The night I stayed in the ER waiting room with Dan's mother, while Emily's ankle swelled around an ice pack like a loaf rising, and I told stories until the nurse called her name. The time I signed as a co-signer for a car loan, because the dealership in Olathe wouldn't take her word for it, and I wanted her to drive something that cut 40% more safely through snow. The days I gave blood, because St. Luke's had called, and there was a shortage, and maybe it would be my blood that helped keep someone else's daughter alive. The way I learned to make do, to make amends, to make plans, to make ends meet. The way I kept my hands busy so my mind wouldn't drown in the pool of what-ifs. If sacrifice is measured in thrift store punchlines and a freezer full of labeled leftovers, and a retirement that looks like a patchwork quilt of hours worked here and there, then yes, I sacrificed. And I would do it again because this is the kind of mother I am. Even when the world says maybe it's the kind that sucks the air out of a room. I have a small job at the gift shop at St. Luke's now, 2 afternoons a week, where I ring up lilies and fuzzy socks and puzzle books with numbers printed too small for me to read without my glasses. Sometimes I watch the way people pick things for the people they love. A daughter chooses a balloon that says, "You've got this," and then deflates in relief when I have a pen for her to sign the card because she couldn't find hers in her bag. A man buys a mug that says, "Best Nana," because he doesn't know what else to do with his hands. I listen. I nod. "Do you need a bow?" I ask. I am the queen of bows. I make them perfect. The kids from radiology come down for candy bars and tell me about basketball games, and I pretend for a moment that I am behind that desk at Crestview again, the person who knows which locker sticks. I pass the corridor on the 3rd floor sometimes, the one where the social worker looked at me with that midnight radio voice, and I touch the cool rail as I walk. I let my fingers drift over that memory like you trace a name carved into a picnic table. I stand by a window and count the red cars in the parking lot, the way I used to count breaths when my own panics came at 3 a.m. Those nights when I would sit on the edge of the tub and put my feet on the cool tile and press my palms into my thighs to feel something present. I don't tell anyone this, because we are not supposed to say certain things past a certain age. At 66, with hair I let go gray because I wanted to see what my mother's mirror saw, I still sometimes need to be held. You learn to hold yourself. It is not the same thing, but it is something. Emily has a life that is not mine to narrate. She lives in a house on the Kansas side because she likes the park across the street and the proximity to a Hy-Vee where the produce is still pretty at 5 p.m. She walks her dog in the morning before work because it makes her feel righteous. She has a group of friends who are kind and who like to hike on weekends even if the leaves are brown and the ground is mud. She is good at her job. And I know this because sometimes someone at church will say, "I saw your M's write-up in the business section. She did that thing with the downtown art festival, right?" And I will say, "Yes," because yes is a thing I am still allowed. Every now and then, I get a photo from her father of Emily standing next to something shiny. "Proud of this one," the text will say, and I will feel anger and something more sour. Something like envy that he can have pride untroubled by the knowledge of how much it costs to be close. He posts on Facebook. I am not on Facebook. The last time I saw a picture of Emily and his new wife, Kristen, who is perfectly fine and who wears scarves like she sells them for a living, carving a pumpkin together. The caption said, "My girls," and it felt like a word you should never use in the plural for any group that contains your daughter. I closed my laptop and went outside and pulled dead leaves off the mums. I told myself that the feeling had nothing to do with leaves. There were signs I ignored because ignoring is what you do when you can still convince yourself the story will turn. Emily's texts got shorter. Her invitations to dinner got clearer. "We'll meet out, not at your place." She stopped asking me to dog sit when she went out of town and started using a service. "It's just easier," she said. And my hand, holding the phone, felt suddenly very old. She told me she was seeing someone new. "I'll tell you when there's something to tell," she added, a boundary placed like a fence in the yard. I could see over it. I have always been able to see over fences. Do not think she is cruel. She is not. She is the girl who once took the extra sandwich from her lunch and slipped it into the backpack of the boy everyone ignored. She is the teenager who drove her grandmother to get groceries and never asked for gas money. She is also the woman who can look at me and say, "Please stop," with a steadiness that reminds me of those candles, the way they manage to be calm in air that is never still. I am learning to make a small life fit. Mornings, I walk at Loose Park when the geese have not yet taken command of the path. I wear my bright blue sneakers because a woman at the shoe store said they would make me happy. And they do. I stop for coffee at Quick Trip because I like the way the lids snap on. I volunteer on Thursdays at the church pantry, sorting cans of corn and tuna and making sure no one gets 2 of the same color beans 3 weeks in a row. There is an art to these things. I talk to Mrs. Ortiz, who lives down the hall from me, and sometimes knocks on my door to ask if I can open a jar her arthritis won't let her conquer. We trade cookies at Christmas. We are building something that looks like friendship out of the scraps. And isn't that what most of us do? I put my phone face down more often. I turn off the setting that lets me see if a message was read. I do not drive by Emily's house even though I sometimes think the dog would like to see me. I resist the urge to give someone a reason that sounds noble. A vow is a hard thing to keep when the person you made it about shares your face. Last week, in the mailroom off the strip of fluorescent light that never gets turned off, there was a letter from St. Luke's with my name typed in that spare hospital font. I held it up to the light and then scolded myself, as if paper gets less sharp by moonlight. I took it upstairs, set it next to my apartment's tiny sink, and made a cup of tea I did not drink. When I opened it, the words made that low whooshing sound in my ears, the way the inside of a shell whispers when you put it to your head. The mammogram I'd had because the mobile van came to the church parking lot had noticed a something. Probably nothing. But let's take a look. A dense area that likes the way it's sitting a little too much. A date circled for a biopsy. A note about family history because the computer likes boxes filled in. My mother had a lump removed at 71 and lived to 90 because she ate oatmeal and was stubborn. I am nothing if not my mother's daughter. I put the letter next to the motel Bible I'd forgotten to return when I moved to the little apartment. The gold words on both felt like different kinds of commandments. There is a particular cruelty to being told to reduce your stress when what causes it is something with its own mind. I leaned my forehead against the cabinet and closed my eyes. I felt the lovely roundness of my own skull. I thought, stupidly, of the frosting roses on the Costco cake, the way you can peel them off in one perfect piece and set them aside for later. I remembered the way the candle wax had slid into the indents of the "Happy Birthday M," like tears that were trying to pretend they were decorations. There it was then. The fault line I could hear humming even when the room was quiet. I had promised to step back. I had vanished, as much as a person can truly vanish when she still lives in the same city and knows the hourly rhythm of every grocery store. And here was a reason that sat in my lap like a warm weight, a reason to call my daughter and say, "There is a thing you should know. Bodies are a family story." My mouth tasted like pennies and regret. I could hear the voice of the social worker in the corridor saying, "You cannot do this for her," and also the voice of my own mother saying, "Tell the child what she needs to know for God's sake." I thought of Emily at 7, sleeping with her glove, breathing even and soft. I thought of her at 17, hands on 10 and 2, me in the passenger seat pressing a brake that wasn't there, trying not to say "careful" every time a car approached. I saw her at 32, blowing out the candles with one measured breath, my own heart obnoxious enough to blow them out for her. I put my palm on the countertop and rubbed a circle slowly because circles are the only shape that feels like it might hold. There are people who will say I am making excuses for 1,000 small choices that were actually one big appetite, the need to be necessary. There are people who will say my daughter was making a brave choice to swim away from the current I created. Both can be true. I'm learning to live in the place where both things can be true, and also to stop talking so much about it. Sometimes I think of the mother I imagined I would be when I put that granite in the showroom. I thought love was a kitchen you fill with warm bread and polite conversation. I didn't write the part where your daughter licks her finger to put out a candle and then turns to you and asks you to go. That night, after the letter, I walked out onto the small balcony of my place, even though the wind cut through my sweater like it was tissue paper. Somewhere down on the street, someone had their radio tuned to a station playing a song I knew every line to. The sound carried up and made the air feel made of threads. I closed my eyes and sang quietly to myself. I have sung under my breath my whole life, while folding towels, while pinning hems, while stirring soup, because songs make you remember how to breathe. I sang and thought of Emily's first choir concert, how she stood in the second row and looked at me over the heads in front of her, and smiled the smallest smile that said, "There you are." She didn't look for her father then. She looked for me. We both were different people in those seconds. It is dangerous to live inside those seconds, but I do sometimes, when it's late, and there is no one to tell me not to. In the morning, I'll call my doctor and make an appointment I am supposed to keep. I will fold my cardigan, slide into my shoes, and bake a banana bread for Mrs. Ortiz, because she says it makes the apartment smell like someone loves her. I will go to the gift shop at the hospital and tie a bow that makes a nurse's eyes crinkle with gratitude. I will walk past the corridor and put my hand on the rail, and I will not take more than that from it. I will stand in front of a shelf of cards and read each one and not buy any, because there is no card that says what I need mine to say. I am Margaret. Maggie to anyone who remembers me rubbing circles on their back when they could not sleep. My antagonist is the girl I raised to be strong enough to turn to me and say, "No more." She is also my daughter. She is not a villain. She is, as she's always been, a person learning how to carry her own life without my hands under it. Perhaps the larger conflict waiting for us isn't a fight at all, but a series of choices we make, one after the other, to tell the truth in ordinary voices. We were not built to survive by grand gestures, but by bread baked, by shirts ironed, by apologies whispered into hair. I have been the kind of mother who tries to drag a boat onto a shore by herself. I am trying now to be the kind who builds a small fire and waits. Not because I have given up, but because sometimes people find their way by light. When I close my eyes, I see candles and a cake, and a room full of people who didn't know where to look. I see my daughter's face, set and shining, as sure of herself as the line where the Missouri meets the Kansas if you look down from the Lewis and Clark overlook. The water takes a while to mix. You can see the seam. It does not mean they will not be the same river down the way. It only means that right here, right now, they need a little distance to learn the strength of their own current. I am trying to learn to trust that. I am trying to unclench my hands. There's a plastic fork still in the side pocket of my purse from some lunch in a parking lot. I keep it there, partly because you never know, and partly because it reminds me that hunger comes and goes, and isn't a crisis most of the time. Tonight, before I turn off the lamp that flickers high, and then low, and then finds it steady, I will put the letter back in its envelope and set it where I can see it. I will try to let the truth sit without putting a bow on it. I will remember the social worker's voice in the corridor and my own mother's hands kneading dough, and my daughter's small fingers once upon a time in the dark, curled around the necklace at my throat. We are made of these things, the messy and the bright. Tomorrow, I might lean toward the phone, the way plants lean toward windows. I might not. The path between us is there, regardless, a thin line through winter grass that says somebody has walked here before and will again. For now, I sit with the heater ticking and the city humming, both of us still awake. I place my hand flat on the counter, Press the skin of my palm to the coolness, and breathe in, breathe out. There are some promises you break, and the world forgives you because you are learning. There are some you keep because the person you're becoming requires it. I cannot tell yet which this will be. But I can tell you the sky over the river is sometimes so bright, it looks like it could wash any cake clean, any wax from any word from any mouth. I am waiting for that light with a patience I did not know I had. The morning after the letter, I tried to behave like a person who had simply misplaced a thought and would find it later. I washed my one frying pan even though it didn't need washing. I put my church cardigan over the back of a chair and moved it to another chair, then back again, because sometimes the illusion of order feels like mercy. When the sun slid a narrow golden ribbon under the blinds, I made oatmeal the way my mother taught me, with a pinch of salt to keep the sweetness honest. I set out 2 bowls by mistake. At the gift shop, I tied bows with hands that remembered how to be sure, even when my breath wasn't. A woman about my age stood at the counter with a stack of magazines and a bottle of ginger ale. "My son's in recovery," she said. And the way she said recovery made me think of boats and storms and ropes thrown from shore. I asked if she wanted a ribbon for the ginger ale, and she laughed that tired laugh that people use to keep from crying and said, "Sure, why not? Make it pretty." I tied the red satin just so and thought of all the things I have tried to make pretty that shouldn't be. When she left, I took a moment by the 3rd-floor window where the parking lot stretches in modest rows, and the sky gives Kansas City that useful light that makes even the hospital shine a little. I put my fingers to the cold glass and remembered the corridor and the social worker and the way "you cannot do this for her" landed gently and then went on proving itself like rain. On my break, I walked down to the lobby where there's that tall art installation with the silver birds suspended mid-flight. Someone had hung a little paper crane among them, probably a child, a different kind of bird with edges that crinkled. It looked like Hope trying on a costume. I stood there longer than my 15 minutes and then took the stairs up because I needed to feel my legs carry me. The phone rang when I got home, and Kristen's name lit up. I stared for a breath and let it ring one more time before I answered. "Hi, Kristen," I said, and tried to soften my voice so it wouldn't sound like I was bracing. "Hi, Maggie," she said, breathless like she always is when she's moving faster than the day. "How are you?" "Fine," I lied, which is what we are trained to say. "You?" Good, she said. And then there was that little pause where news puts on its shoes. "Listen, I wanted to reach out because of the kickoff brunch for the art festival on Saturday. Emily's really excited. It's a big deal. She's been working so hard." "She has," I said. And my hands wanted to do something, so I wiped a counter that was already clean. "So," Kristen said, voice pitched up a little high like she was climbing something slippery. "Em thought it might be easier if we kept numbers tight for the family section. She asked me to help coordinate. She thought maybe, given everything, it would be best if you didn't come to this one. The word best has a way of carrying a suitcase full of worse." "Of course," I said. "Of course." I had meant to keep the marbles of boundaries in my mouth, smooth and cold, and not spit them out. Instead, I swallowed them whole, and they sat there heavy. Kristen rushed to add, "She's just really trying to keep her stress down. You know how she is when there's a lot of eyes on her. She loves you. You don't have to explain," I said, and it was true. She didn't. The explanation had been written in Costco icing and candle smoke. "I hope it goes beautifully." "Thank you," she said, and I could hear her relief hop like a happy dog. "I'll tell her." After we hung up, I stood in the quiet and listened to the heater tick. I thought of all the brunches where I had been the one to bring the fruit salad, the good kind with mint and a squeeze of lime, and how I would put the bowl down, and somebody would say, "Ooh, Maggie brought the pretty one," and my heart would get that small, proud lift that feels like a penny you find in a parking lot, upturned and shining. I set down the dish towel and felt an ache travel through me like some slow wire heating up. On Thursday, at the pantry, a new volunteer with hair the color of summer wheat and a voice as bright as a car commercial said, "We love your energy, Maggie, but the clients prefer to choose for themselves. It's more dignified." She said clients the way a person says it when she has learned to declutter the words poor and hungry. I had been pairing kidney beans with diced tomatoes because the chili thing is just what you do when the air turns. It's the kind of pairing that keeps you from feeling helpless. Okay, I said. Of course. When Mrs. Ortiz came in later to pick up her box, she touched my wrist. I like it when you put the cumin with the beans, she said, and I laughed in the soft way that keeps tears from sneaking out. I'll save you a pinch, I whispered, and felt like I was stealing something for us both. On the way home, I stopped at Hy-Vee for bananas and milk, and allowed myself to walk down the seasonal aisle because sometimes you need to look at cheerful things holding no particular use. There were dish towels with sunflowers on them, Kansas loud and proud, and I held one in my hand. It felt sturdy. My mother had a towel like that once, with yellow blooms and neat stitches along the hem. At the end of the row, I ran into Joshua's mother, who wears her lipstick like armor. We hadn't seen each other since the letter. For a second, something like kindness flashed across her face, and then you could watch her choose a different drawer to open. "Margaret," she said, and one word can do as much as 5 paragraphs if you let it. "How are you?" "I'm well," I said. "And you?" "Oh, you know," she replied, and looked at the towel in my hand as if it carried a story. "Emily's doing some remarkable things downtown. I read about her. You must be so proud." "I am," I said, and that was the truth. She nodded, satisfied she had done the polite thing, and moved on. I stood there with my towel and the smell of pumpkin-spiced everything, and I felt that particular loneliness that comes from no longer having the language to talk to someone who shares your attachments. I put the towel in my cart like a person who knows a symbol when she sees one. That night in my small kitchen, I opened the drawer where I keep the things that make me feel prepared. Rubber bands, take-out soy sauce packets, a pen that always works, and the spare key to Emily's house that I should have returned long ago. I had kept it tucked under a box of tea like a secret. I held it in my palm and thought of all the ways a key can make a person behave badly. I thought of the night of the soup and the no, and how a quiet no can be a whole street full of signs you ignore until you are pulled over and asked for your license and the story of your life. I closed my hand around the key until the edges pressed little crescent moons into my skin. I opened my eyes and saw the old Pyrex casserole dish on the top shelf, the one with the faint crack that spidered toward a handle but never crossed it. It's the dish in which I have baked a decade of casseroles for people who needed me to do something, instead of standing with them in the unbearable. It is also the dish that taught me, in its way, that heat, travels, and stresses find the easiest path. I pulled it down and set it on the counter. The crack caught the light. I ran a fingertip along it, the same way you press a seam to see how strong it is. There it was, the object that told the truth whether I wanted it to or not. The dish was an emblem, a map of the route I had taken too many times. Bake, cover, deliver, let the smell do the consoling. What if I used it to deliver something else? Silence. Return. Withdrawal that was not a punishment but a bow. I folded the sunflower towel around the dish the way my mother wrapped warm things to carry them across the yard at Thanksgiving. Edges tucked neat underneath, corners meeting in a little knot at the top. I slid the spare key into the dish, its dull metal skidding faintly against the glass. Then I went to my coat, reached into the pocket, and took out the loose park photo, the one with the gap in her smile, and my eyes caught mid-laugh. I laid the photo flat over the key, my finger resting a second on her tiny hand on my knee, then let go. I thought of the letter in the kitchen drawer, the one about density and next steps. I wanted to leave that too because bodies are family stories, but it felt like handing her a fire and walking away. No bows, no softening language, just the facts written in my tidy school secretary hand with the doctor's number, folded once. It would sit in the dish like a small plain stone. I turned the dish over for a moment and, with a grease pencil I keep for labeling leftovers, wrote on the bottom in my neat, practical script, "Not for return." My hand did not shake. When I flipped it back, the words weren't visible. I knew they were there. That felt like enough. The plan shaped itself with the kind of calm that sometimes visits a person in a storm. Saturday, the art festival brunch would pull her away, eyes up, shoulders squared. The house would be empty or nearly so. I could drive down to her street, the way I have been avoiding, carry my dish like a peace offering that did not require an answer, and set it on the doormat where I have stood so many times, nose filling with the smell of whatever she was baking now. Leave the dish, ring the bell, walk away. No note beyond the stone of medical fact. No argument. No mother magic trying to fix what is not mine to fix. Then I would get in my Camry and do the thing I owe to the woman I am trying to be. Go west. Santa Fe, the trip I kept postponing until it turned into a joke whose punchline was grief. Barbara had texted me last month. The casitas are still here, Mags. The light's not going anywhere. I wrote back a heart and a promise I didn't believe. Maybe this time I would. Friday was all small humiliations, as if the world wanted to pile them high so I could see the shape of what I was leaving. At St. Luke's, a young nurse bought a best mom ever mug, and then, seeing me look at it a beat too long, said, "Oh, it's for a friend. My mom and I are complicated." She smiled apologetically and then relievedly, the way people do when they realize they don't owe you a backstory. Later, a man in a suit asked where the bathroom was, and then thanked me like I had saved his life. I realized then that I had taken a job where gratitude could be transactional, controlled, counted at the register and put in a drawer. On the way home, I drove down Ward Parkway and watched the big houses look exactly like Comfort. Brick and evergreen, and porch lights already on. I pulled up to my building and Mrs. Ortiz called to me from her window. "Maggie, you have a minute?" My jar won again. Upstairs, the stubborn jar of pickles surrendered under my hand. "You could start a business," she laughed, and I said, "Only if you staff it." And we shared a smile that felt like a porch light after all. That night, sleep came and went like a shy cat. I folded the cardigan and unfolded it. I checked the time more than once. I touched the letter just to be sure the ink hadn't faded in a single day. In the morning, I put on my sensible shoes and the blue sneakers and a bag in the back seat in case my feet needed relief. The dish, wrapped and weighted and somehow lighter than anything I've ever carried, sat on the passenger seat like a quiet stranger. The sunflower towel made it look festive. I did not tie a bow. Before I left, I stood in the bathroom and held my ring between thumb and forefinger. The habit of wearing it had nothing to do with Dan anymore, and everything to do with the way a person looks down at her hand and reads a story in metal. I slid it off and placed it in the small dish where I keep my earrings, next to a pair of studs missing their backs. My finger looked pale for a second, then ordinary. I kissed 2 fingers and touched the mirror. Old superstition, new meaning. The city was crisp and bright, the way Kansas City is when it's trying to make you forget the way winter bites. I took the long way, past Luce Park, where the geese had not yet claimed the fountain, and a handful of runners bobbed by like buoyant punctuation. The rose garden lay trimmed and ready for spring, a diagram of hope with labels written in gardeners' neat block letters. I pulled over for a moment and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and said, "Okay then," out loud, to the car, because the car has been with me through worse. When I turned onto Emily's block, my hands went cold and then hot, and then cold again like the body couldn't decide what kind of story this was going to be. Her house looks like it should. White with black shutters, porch swing, a little bird feeder she bought at an art fair, and a yard that tries its best. Her neighbor had a flag out for the betta fish his kids had buried under the maple. Construction paper taped to a stick with a drawing of something that looked like a dragon. The dog must have been out with her. I didn't hear his nails on the tile, and that small grace made me believe for a moment in timing. I parked 2 houses down so my car wouldn't be the loudest thing on a quiet street. I lifted the dish, felt the heft of it, the glass cool through the towel, the knot nestling perfectly into my palm. The sunflower print glowed like an obvious metaphor. I walked up the path and the doorbell seemed suddenly too intimate, so I set the dish down first, right square in the center of the welcome mat with the fall leaves printed on it. Welcome rarely knows what it's inviting. I knelt, my knees complaining the way 66-year-old knees complain, and adjusted the corners to sit flat. The key slid a little in the dish with a noise only I could hear, because I was the only one listening for it. I took the envelope from my purse, the one with the neat handwriting that could just as easily have been a permission slip or a sick note. and slid it between the towel and the glass so it wouldn't blow. Then I reached into my purse one last time for the plastic fork that had lived there so long as a joke about hunger and preparedness. I held it, cheap and light, and felt the symbolism trying too hard. I smiled to myself and put it back. Hunger makes fools and saints of us. A fork would not save me. The key and the photo and the plain truth would have to do. My finger hovered over the bell, and the little round button looked like an eye staring back at me. I pressed it. The sound inside was the same as ever, that cheerful chime someone had installed before any of this began. I stood up and took a step back, then another, then turned, my hands suddenly empty, and not knowing what to do with themselves. I began to walk. When I reached the sidewalk, the neighbor's motion light flicked on and lit me up like a stage. My heart knocked against my ribs in that obnoxious way that thinks it deserves applause. I kept walking, and the wind found my hair and made it move like it was trying to float off my head and leave me there. I had just reached my car when I heard a car turn into the street, a familiar engine hum that my bones recognized. I ducked instinctively and then scolded myself for acting like a teenager sneaking out the back of a gym. I straightened, hand on the Camry's door handle, and watched in the mirror as Emily's little blue SUV rolled to a stop in front of her house. I hadn't counted on the brunch ending early, or her leaving early, or whatever had changed the schedule that was supposed to keep us from being in the same picture. She stepped out in one assured motion, her hair pulled back into that ponytail that means business, her dress the kind of sturdy canvas that says I can carry plans in my pockets. She paused, head tilted, like she was listening for something. She walked up the path. I saw the moment she noticed the dish. She stopped. Her shoulders squared the way they do when something unexpected asks to be named. She crouched, her knees stronger than mine, and untied the towel with the kind of practical grace I taught her in a kitchen decades ago. The sunflower blooms opened under her hands. For one suspended second, the neighborhood and the city and my body stopped their noise. She lifted the towel, and then her head turned just enough that, if the light had been different, if the angle had been worse, she would have seen me. "Mom?" she called. And there it was, the word I hadn't heard from her mouth in months. Not Maggie. Mom. It was soft, not pleading, not accusing. Just a name put gently into the air to see if it would land. Every part of me reached, the way a plant does without deciding to. The good girl in me, the fixer, the person with extra hair ties and a mint, ran toward that word like it was home. My hands even curled around the top of the door like they might shove it closed, then fly open and give me away. In that astonishingly long second, I saw a whole life roll itself out in front of me, walking up the path, saying her name, explaining the doctor's letter and the key, apologizing and meaning it, taking whatever she handed back to me, whether it was a hug or a boundary. It would have been a decent story, the kind of story you tell later and everyone nods. Something steadier uncoiled in me, a tired animal that has finally found a shady spot and refuses to be chased. Love that had learned manners. The voice from the corridor, the cool rail under my hand, my mother's towel, the words under the dish no one could see, not for return. I stood very still. Then I slid into the car and closed the door as gently as if I were in a nursery with a sleeping baby. My throat burned. My eyes did what eyes do. I placed my hands on the wheel. "Breathe," I heard myself say, and I obeyed. "Mom?" she said again, louder. The dog barked from inside, nails ticking on tile like a metronome. A porch across the street opened. A neighbor raised a hand and then lowered it when he saw we were inside a scene. I turned the key. The engine caught with its familiar shudder that means it forgives me for all the times I forget an oil change. I pulled away without looking back. My neck screamed for me to, but I let my forward vision be the only true thing. At the end of the block, an oak had dropped its leaves onto the street in one golden flood, and the tires brushed through them with a sound like paper being crumpled and smoothed again. I turned onto the main road, and then toward the highway that takes you out of the city if you let it. The sunlight on the windshield found the streak I always miss. I kept driving. By the time I hit the 435 loop, the lump in my throat had settled into something like resolve. The Camry hummed through lanes smoother than most of the decisions I've made. The radio found a station playing a song I used to dance to in the kitchen with a toddler on my hip. I turned it up. I did not let it undo me. Blue Valley slid by, and then the signs for Olathe, then farther, until the names on green boards started to look like they had been chosen by wind and settlement, and not by committees. Emporia, Strong City, Cottonwood Falls. The Flint Hills rose up, the kind of landscape that asks you to hush and look. I pulled off once at a rest stop where a plaque told the story of tallgrass and bison, and I put my palm flat on the warm hood and took in the sightline that had no people in it. You don't realize how much you are always reading faces until they disappear, and you have to read horizon. I texted Barbara from the parking lot of a place in Council Grove that serves pie that tastes like it remembers somebody. Headed your way, I wrote. Not sure how fast. I have to make a stop at St. Luke's first thing Monday. I didn't elaborate. She sent back a heart, and the words, Casita's spare key is under the blue pot, same as always. I cried for a minute in my car. Quiet, efficient, like a person who has an appointment, and then went inside and ordered a slice of lemon meringue. When the server set it down, the cloud of meringue looked like a sky being brave, and I laughed a little at my own sentimentality and ate it anyway. I could tell you that the drive turned into a meditation, that I shed my old self the way plains shed light, that the white cliffs of somewhere rose and made me epiphany-prone. It didn't. The air vents blew unevenly. My left foot cramped. A truck the size of a house sat too long in the lane next to me. But there was a steadiness in the road I hadn't felt in months. The section where the land tilts and the grass looks like an animal's coat growing in the wrong direction. The sudden appearance of twins of water in ponds that pretend to be mirrors. Those things conspired to make me breathe the way you're supposed to when you count to 5 in and 5 out. I thought of all the small humiliations, how they had stacked like cans on a pantry shelf no one wanted to own. We'll keep numbers tight. Clients prefer to choose. It's for a friend. The letter that had been a kindness in a corridor turned into a commandment. The way I'd turned my willingness into a tool I used on everyone, including Emily. I thought of the casserole dish sitting on the porch, my handwriting hidden under it with its plain declaration. Not for return. I imagined her lifting the photo and the key and the envelope and feeling what she wanted to feel without my face telling her which way to go. As I drove, I rested my hand on the seat where the dish had sat on the way over. The outline of its cold weight lingered like the ghost of something I'd been carrying too long. I hummed to myself a verse from a hymn we sang when the youth choir needed filling out and I was young enough to still feel like a soprano. Lead me, guide me, I sang, under my breath, used to asking for help I couldn't quite define. The horizon unspooled, big and undemanding. Just outside of Wichita, I pulled into a gas station whose coffee tasted like someone had tried very hard. A teenager in a hoodie held the door for me with the same composure as the trucker at Waffle House. These gestures soften the corners of the day. You add them up, and sometimes they give you the courage not to turn around. I didn't make it to Santa Fe that day. I stopped in a motel with a neon sign that used to be brighter. The night clerk said, "We're painting the sea tomorrow," and it sounded like a promise. The room smelled like other people's plans. I put my purse down and sat on the edge of the bed and took the letter out again, the one with the tidy hospital font and the date circled. I set my phone beside it, screen dark. I placed the sunflower towel next to the sink to make the place look like it had a mother. I washed my face and looked at the woman in the mirror whose hair had gone to the color it always wanted, whose jaw held steady, who had left a dish on a porch and walked away. In the morning, I woke to that quiet particular, to towns that aren't yours. I made myself swallow the fear with the same steady insistence as oatmeal. I drove back east just long enough to be sitting in the plastic chair at St. Luke's at the time the letter told me. I filled out the form, and when it asked for emergency contact, I said to the young man at the desk with kind eyes, "Would you like my neighbor's number?" And he said, "Whomever you'd want us to call," with a professionalism that kept my heart from bursting. I wrote down Mrs. Ortiz, because she would show up with a sweater and an opinion. I slid the paper back and felt something like pride, ridiculous and small and absolutely mine. The biopsy room was colder than rooms ought to be when they are going to touch the inside of you. The nurse adjusted the blanket with a gentleness that made me close my eyes. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I am," I said, and the room did not argue. The machine made its small industrial noises. The doctor narrated like a man on a nature show. "Now you'll feel a press. Now a pinch." And I listened because it is a relief sometimes to have something to listen to that is not your own head. When it was over, I dressed slowly, grateful for the cardigan, even though the air outside had turned false spring. I walked down the hallway past the gift shop and did not go in. The kids from radiology were crowded at the counter, buying candy they'd justified later by their step counts. I lifted a hand to the girl who always wears her hair in 2 puffballs, and she lifted hers back, and this small exchange felt as ceremonious as any ribbon cutting. In the parking lot, I unlocked my car and sat for a moment with the keys in my hand. The little tag with the Camry's number, the house key, the mailbox key, the nothing special keys that prove a life. In my bag, under the pack of tissues and the chapstick and the pen that always works, the plastic fork waited, silly and faithful. I took it out and looked at it. I thought of all the dashboard lunches eaten in parking lots while figuring out what to say next. I thought of hunger, mine and hers and everyone's. I rolled down the window and placed the fork gently in the trash can by the cart corral. It landed with a light little clink, barely audible, like a note at the end of a song. Then I texted Barbara one more time. "Leaving for New Mexico this afternoon," I wrote. "I'll call you from the road." I did not text Emily. I had left her what I needed to leave. I had not taken from her what I didn't have the right to. The choice sat in me like a stone I had decided to love. When I merged onto I-35 again, the car slotted into the stream with the confidence of someone choosing her lane. The sky was that hard bright blue that makes you squint, and bless the inventor of sunglasses. I thought of the dish on the porch, the hidden words, the sunflower towel, the photo and the key, and the envelope like a small altar to something honest. I thought of the way her voice had sounded when she called my name. I thought of the way I had chosen, and I did not crumble. Love without boundaries can look like harm. Love with them looks sometimes like a woman driving west under a sky so big it makes you feel like a sentence in a long book, and also like a whole story all by yourself. Somewhere near the state line, a trucker flashed his lights to let me into the lane. I waved my hand in that old-fashioned way so he'd know I'd seen. The line of horizon lowered and rose as the road went, and I felt the click inside, the place where basta is not anger, but a firm placing of something down. Enough, I thought, and the word did not bruise. It set. It held. Far behind me, a doorbell chime would have faded. A towel would have been folded or not. A photo would have been put somewhere safe, or left on a counter to gather mail around it. A key would have clinked into a dish I once filled with peppermints. A letter would have been read with whatever face she wanted to wear. Those were her choices. Mine were on the road in front of me, the white dashed line keeping time with a heart that had learned to be quiet in the ways that matter. I drove into the afternoon with the heater adjusted to the number that felt like a compromise. I hummed an old hymn, then a song from the radio, then nothing at all. The words I had written on the bottom of the dish floated up in my mind like a benediction I had accidentally given myself. Not for return. It wasn't a punishment. It was a prayer. An invitation to both of us to fill our own plates. To eat when we're hungry. To let the kitchen be a place where no one is fed what she didn't ask for. The river back home would be the same river by the time it passed the bend. The seam would blur and turn into one surface, carrying barge and leaf alike. I don't know when our seam will soften. I have stopped trying to push the water. Ahead, a billboard announced a pie contest in a town I had never heard of. I laughed, the kind of laugh that makes your shoulders drop. I put my hand to my throat where once my daughter's little fingers had rested in the dark when she was scared, and I said her name aloud in the car, like a blessing borrowed and returned. Emily. The name hung there, loved and light, and went where it needed to. I drove, and the road, a patient old clock, marked my going. The wind had turned, the sky was clean, and the light ahead looked like something I had finally let myself deserve. I slept like a woman who had finally done something she'd been rehearsing for years. Not perfect, but true. The motel room clock blinked with numbers I didn't care to count. I woke with the sunlight like a promise I could take or leave, and for the first time in a long while, I chose to take it. I dressed slowly, the way you pick a favorite sweater and cup the collar like it's keeping your name warm. I called Barbara from the road, and we laughed about the casitas as if they had been waiting on me like an old dog at the back door. She said, "Bring a little casserole dish, Mags, for tradition's sake." I told her I already had one in a car I was still learning how to drive again. I drove home a different way, because the horizon had taught me something about edges. They are always there to be crossed. There's a part of a trip that unspools in the chest, a soft place where the sound of your own breathing returns like an instrument being tuned. I stopped at a rest stop where there was a plaque about tallgrass and bison, and read it twice, as if the story might somehow teach me to stand planted. When I walked back to the Camry, a stray redbud seed lay by the wheel like a small wrong turned right, and I took it as a sign that things could sprout even in the smallest of soils. By the time I pulled onto my street, my phone had 3 messages. One from Barbara that said simply, "Drive safe, pie on arrival." One from Kristen, a brief, warm note thanking me for understanding, and one that I did not expect a minute after I saw the porch light on at Emily's house go out. It was a photo, taken from the exact angle I had left the dish, the towel folded back, the envelope slightly askew, the casserole dish sitting centered like a small sundial. There was no note, just the image. My heart did something that felt less like skipping than like remembering how to beat in a new rhythm. She didn't call then. She didn't reach out for proof or apology or explanation. She had what I had left her, fact, image, autonomy, and she was letting it do its work. That, more than anything, became the softest immediate consequence of the thing I had done. Emily had room to make of the moment what she needed. A day later, at the hospital, I sat at the little plastic table with the cup of too strong coffee and the magazine that always leaves a scent of perfume on my fingers. My name was called, and I walked into the room where the doctor wore a calm like a shawl. The biopsy had been a thing that could have been a thunderbolt. Instead, it was a test that asked us both to be patient. "We'll have results in a couple of days," he said. And that sentence landed not like a verdict, but like a schedule you can mark on the calendar, and then live the days between. I liked that. It gave me a job, to be present for myself, to do the small things that say you will be there for the life you have left. On the second evening back from Santa Fe plans, and before the results called, my phone lit up. A text. From Emily. "Got your gift on the porch. Thank you. Can we talk?" "Not tonight. Maybe Saturday? Coffee at Beaner's?" The message made the room close and open like a bell. I typed, "Yes," and then erased it, because yes had always been a word I gave away too easily. I typed instead, "Saturday, yes. I'll be there." I left the words without the flood of explanation. I had learned to not smother a conversation with the history that had made it hurt. Saturday morning came with the kind of cold that makes your face honest. Luce Park was quieter than usual, the paths still dotted with leaves that had surrendered the week before. I tied my shoes, took my cardigan even though the sun promised to pull the day warm, and walked to Beaner's because it's the kind of place where the coffee is reliable and the tables are forgiving. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a mug that sang with steam, and waited for her voice to find the ration of words she wanted to use. When she came in, she moved with a kind of ease I'd been missing. A woman comfortable with her shadow. Emily sat down without preamble. "Hi," she said. The word was a landing, not a battle. "Hi," I answered. My voice did something like a prayer. "You look good. So do you." She smiled the small, private smile she reserves for me when she wants to tell me a joke we both remember. "That dish was surprising," she said, stirring her coffee like she was trying to find a seam in it. "I thought facts belonged on porches sometimes," I said, and the admission tasted like iron and relief. "I didn't want to hand you anything wrapped in apology." She nodded. "I read the letter. I read your handwriting. I was confused, angry, sad, all of it, but I kept looking at the picture. The towel looked like a sunflower, and Her fingers made a pause in the air, the exact one she used when she tries to put a sky into words. It felt like you were letting go in a way that was kind, not dramatic, not performative. That's what I wanted. I took a breath that was more of an offering than a demand. I thought if I left the things you needed and the things that were mine to keep separate, maybe you could choose. I also left because I was scared I'd call and say the wrong thing and step across a line. I didn't want to be the person who undid your work. We sat in that thin, quiet space between the sips, and she watched me with an intensity that had softened over the years into something that could hold both disappointment and compassion. You did undo sometimes, she said. You didn't mean harm. You meant love, but sometimes love felt like suffocation. I needed air, and I needed to learn how to find my breath in a room where you're breathing for yourself, I said. I'm sorry for the times I took what was yours. I'm not asking to be let back in like nothing happened. I'm asking to learn how to come close without taking over. She looked at me like someone assessing a plant to see whether it needed cutting or watering. I want you in my life, Mom, she said finally. Not erased, not hovering. Here, but with rules. Can we do that? My throat tightened in a pleasant ache. Yes, I said. Tell me the rules. We made them in the way people do who have loved enough to know the rough edges. She said text first, phone only if urgent. She said no unannounced keys, please ask. She said come to the neighborhood parties and not to say too much at the plaque cuttings. I promised I would ask before I intervened, that I would let the people she chose to love have their own scenes. She promised to call if she needed someone to pick up a dog or a casserole in an emergency. We both laughed at that, thinking of me and my casserole dish like an old habit that might have a new script. Then she hesitated, and I felt the room tighten a fraction. There's another thing, she said. Saturday is the art festival again next month. I don't want the family section. But could you come by the booth in the afternoon? No speeches, no salads, just you. If you want. My chest felt full like I'd been given a cup and allowed to sip. I'll be there, I said. Not to rescue. Just to be present in a way we both could live with. The promise felt less like a surrender and more like a map. In the days that followed, the small consequences unfolded like the turning of a page. People at church noticed my face loosening and said little things like, "You look rested," as if they suspected a new herb in my tea. Mrs. Ortiz brought me jam and a casserole recipe that called for more breadcrumbs than sense. I read it twice and then bookmarked it for a future domestic experiment. At the gift shop, a nurse asked after my biopsy, and I told her the truth. I'm fine for now. She patted my hand the way nurses do, and I felt held without being smothered. The doctor's letter returned with results that asked for more attention, but not alarm. A call for a follow-up, a plan made with a steady surgeon's voice, and a nurse who texted me later a joke about how hospital gowns are a leap of faith. I showed the letter to Emily because the truth of our bodies had become one of the new, honest places between us. She came with me to the pre-op appointment and sat with her hands folded, the same way she'd sat at Beaner's stirring her coffee. When the nurse asked who this person was, she said, "She's my mother," and there was a sound in her voice like a lighthouse being lit. I felt proud in a way that didn't need permission. The casserole dish, after the porch morning, became a quiet, sacred thing in both our lives. Emily texted me weeks later, a photo of it in her kitchen cupboard, now clean and used with pride. "For those nights you don't need to know about," she wrote, and I answered with a heart and a sentence. "For the right reasons." She used it once to bring shepherd's pie to a neighbor whose husband had gone into the hospital. She left it on the porch, then rang the bell, and I thought of us both learning the new choreography. To give when asked, to arrive when invited, to let the door open with consent. My own life turned in quieter, steadier circles. Santa Fe was not a place that fixed what had been frayed, but it showed me how light can sit on the same tiles and make them look like they are new. I walked through casitas and ate green chili stew and learned what it meant to be a traveler whose heart is not always returning to the same porch. I wrote postcards to Mrs. Ortiz and Barbara, and even Kristen, a small way of practicing reaching without ripping. When I came back, There were leaves in Luce Park arranged like bookmarks, and a neighbor's child who insisted I take a handmade bracelet because, he said very seriously, it's for the brave lady who left a dish. The bigger reconciliations unspooled over months, not in a rush. Emily and I had hard talks about what it meant to be a mother and an adult child. There were times one of us would cry in a parking lot and the other would say nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not be too much. We negotiated holidays. We made rules for the casseroles. No surprise entries into homes, but yes to soup if called for. We laughed until our sides hurt remembering me trying to make quinoa once because I thought it sounded like something responsible people ate. She showed me how to use the oven without setting off the smoke alarm, and I taught her a shortcut to a lemon meringue recipe that never fails. There were tiny, tender returns of what had been lost. One evening in late spring, Emily knocked on my door and stood on my stoop with her dog's leash in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Inside was a pie, store-bought, but warm with intention, and a small note that read, "For the one who taught me how to bake bravery." We ate slices on my kitchen table and both got some on our sleeves. When I wiped mine, she said, "You're forgiven for the sunglasses incident." I blinked, searching for the memory, and she laughed. "You showed up at my college orientation with like 3 pairs," she explained. And we both laughed until the room felt gilded. There were also moments where the seams held tense. Old habits are like roots. When you try to pull them up, they sometimes tug something tender. I slipped once, called her when she had asked for a day alone, and got a voicemail that was short and cool. I listened and then left a message that said, simply, "I heard you. I'm sorry." She called back later that night, and we spoke for an hour about the weather and the book she was reading and a silly coworker. It was, in its own way, a truce. Not erasure, but a new map we were both learning to read. The real freedom I felt, though, was quieter than the return and more lasting than the apologies. It was the way my hands no longer reached for someone else's steering wheel when the road curved. It was the color of the coffee cup at Beaner's when I sat alone and didn't feel guilty for having my own table. It was the dish in her cupboard like a token that said 2 things at once. We still carry what we once were, and we are choosing what to carry forward. The casserole dish became, for me, both emblem and teacher. The crack that had spidered through its glass taught me that beauty is not a clean surface, but the endurance of a thing that keeps being useful despite its flaws. The sunflower towel wrapped around it was less about the brightness of what I gave, and more about the warmth with which I could wrap a truth and set it down. "Not for return," I had written in grease pencil on its bottom, while my hands were steady because there are some old patterns you stop feeding when you want to live better. The phrase stopped being a final seal and became a benediction, a request to love without taking over, to offer help that heals rather than smothers. Months later, when the biopsy had become a medical story with a good ending, watchful waiting and an agreement to stay vigilant, Emily and I stood on the porch at Luce Park, behind a small 4th of July picnic she'd organized for friends. She wore a bandana she'd picked up at an art fair, and leaned against me in that private, comfortable way women of a certain age allow each other. "You know," she said, looking out at the pond where the light made tiny diamonds clatter like coins, "I'm glad you left." I felt her words like rain on a parched window. "Me too," I said, because it was true. The leaving had been a gift that cost me everything I thought I deserved. It asked me to be needy sometimes, and confident other times. It taught me how to offer help, and how to refuse it when it wasn't healthy for the person receiving. We didn't pretend everything was neat. We still had disappointments. Someone would put Aunt Jean's funeral arrangements in the family group text, and I'd hesitate before I knew if I should answer. Or she'd bring up a new person she wanted me to meet, and I'd have to remind myself to stay in my lane. But the seams between us had become places to mend together, not places to throw blame. The casserole dish sat, sometimes in her cupboard, and sometimes in mine, as if it had learned to travel light. There were other small, sacred returns. I started keeping a journal again, the kind with a blue cover and a ribbon that slides between pages like a friendly bookmark. I wrote about the motel rooms and the songs on the radio and the faces at the Waffle House counter. I learned that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. that you can be companionable with your own company. I learned the shape of my own breathing and how to count it without flinching. If you asked me what the moment after the climax taught me most plainly, I'd say this: letting go does not mean vanishing. It means allowing for the possibility of return, the kind of return that fit both of our hands. It taught me that a mother's love can be both fierce and gentle, that it can step back and remain steady in the same heartbeat. It taught me to be brave enough to be small sometimes, to accept that my presence is not proof of my worth. On slow nights when the city hums and the heater sighs the same way it did the motel night, I take the dish out of the cupboard and run my thumb along its rim. The crack is smaller up close. It looks a little like a river line that the light has honored. I put the towel around it and set it somewhere in the house where it can be seen but not always used, like a reminder that some gifts are best to be given and not bartered back. Once, when the wind was a steady friend and the river wore its winter coat, I took the dish to Luce Park and set it on the edge of the rose garden with a note tucked under it that read, "For the nights you choose to let me help." I left without ringing anyone's bell. A woman walking her dog picked it up later and put it in her basket, smiling as if she had found a small, useful treasure. I thought of Emily finding things in the world on her own terms and felt a fierce, gentle pride. If you find yourself holding a hand that wants to do everything, ask yourself, what does love look like right now? Does it look like an extra casserole slid onto a porch? Or does it look like a chair left empty so the person you love can choose to sit? There is no perfect answer, only honest ones. There is grace in learning how to ask for the rules and grace in learning how to keep them. I am Margaret, also Maggie, sometimes Mrs. Mallory to people who needed a signature. I drove away the night she asked me to leave, and in doing so I discovered how to return better. I baked banana bread for Mrs. Ortiz and learned new recipes. I went to Santa Fe and came back. I sat in clinic rooms and held my breath and let it go. I left a casserole dish on a porch and learned what happens when you leave something that's useful rather than something that controls. If this reaches anyone who has ever been the person offering too many hands or the person asking for space, know this: boundaries can be gifts. We can love fiercely and let the other person build their own life. We can give our help when asked and accept that sometimes the best help is quiet. You will be surprised by the way a single clean action, leaving a thing and stepping away, can make room for healing that both of you will carry forward. If this touched you, please leave a comment to tell me what letting go taught you. Tap the like if you found something in these words, and subscribe so we can keep meeting here, where small, honest stories live, and where we practice being kinder to ourselves and to the ones we love. I left a dish on her porch and learned how to hold the rest of my life with hands that know when to give and when to let go.